This is what's called a Carolina Carports metal building, and I'm going to get over closer to the building and walk you through the ins and outs and the thought process and the layout and what you have to think about with the Carolina Carports building. When you're looking at Carolina Carports or pretty much any building, you have an option on your siding of whether you want it horizontal, which is the building behind you that you see. I did horizontal siding, and then you also have an option on the roof to have horizontal roofing. I think most people elect for the vertical roofing option because rain wants to flow downhill, right? Or water wants to flow downhill. And if you have horizontal roofing, then you're going to have ribs that the water is going to have to go over. So the process for a steel building is you actually purchase the building. You figure out the size, the dimensions, the configurations, and we'll go over that in a minute. But you figure all that out, but that has nothing to do with the site prep. So you have to do site prep yourself. You have to do concrete yourself. If you're doing any sort of plumbing or electrical that's in the slab, all that is done before they come on site and build the building. Okay, here's the front view of the building. And I mentioned the wind rating. The wind rating is because I'm in Florida, and only certain dealers can build the Carolina Carports in Florida. My particular dealer was out of Georgia. I believe it was Valdosta, Georgia. His name was Chad Burke. There was no building out there that was exactly the way I wanted my building to be. So he's very patient with me designing this building and configuring it. It may be a little bit cheaper if you're not in Florida because you wouldn't be subject to the wind loads. But this building had to be rated to 140 in order for it to be built in Florida. So if you hear some huffing and puffing in the background, it's Bella. She's going to be along with us on this tour. She's chasing a butterfly or a grasshopper. Okay, so let's talk about this building. So the center part of this building is 20 foot wide, and that's what you'll see usually in the advertisements for Carolina Carports or the other metal buildings out there. And then they attach what's called leans to them. So I have a 12-foot lean on the left and a 12-foot lean on the right, for a total of 44 feet wide on my building. Leans are optional. You can do one, you can do two, you can do none. You can just have the center portion, and the leans can be completely enclosed, or you could leave, say, one lean open if you wanted more of a pole barn effect, and you could close the other one in. But a big thing for me was shade. Being able to have a place where I could work outside and be shaded. You can work under that shaded porch right there when it's 100 degrees out, and it's bearable. I'm not gonna say that it's cool, but I will say that it's bearable. What it requires is that, you see this whole side of the building, that could be steel and enclosed, horizontal siding, all the way up to the front of the building. But in order to bridge this 15-foot gap right here, we had to install what's called a header. But headers are something that allow you to free span the building, and it allowed me to free span it inside as well. So it was important for me to have no vertical infrastructure or no vertical studs inside holding up the roof or the rafters or the trusses. You can get windows. Windows are an option. I put 3 on each side. They're fairly evenly spaced. You're limited on the exact spacing because of the vertical studs. So when we get inside, you'll see that the window has to go against the stud, and the studs are at a set like 5 feet. And then you have multiple options for roll-up doors. Your doors, as far as height, are going to be limited by the header that's above them. They need a certain amount of room above the door in order for the roll-up mechanism to work. So this is an 8x8 door. That's a 10x10 door in the center. And over on the other side, that's an 8x8. And then I have one man door on this side, and eventually I'll have a sidewalk and landscaping here, but this is my primary entrance, is this 3-foot door, man door. But this is the back of the shed. I elected to have no windows on the back of it, but I did when I had my electrical done. And again, the electrical is something that you do independently. You don't do that through Carolina Carports. But at the peak up there, right there, I had it wired so I can put an exhaust fan. So I don't know if I really want a hole in my building. I'm still debating that, but I do have the wire pre-positioned in there. Something I want to talk about here is you'll see the lean on the left and the lean on the right are lower than the actual building. So I think the building is like 14 foot. It's probably about 16 to the peak and probably 14 to there. And then there's that 18-inch or 2-foot drop. I think it's a 2-foot drop. And then inside the lean is 12 foot tall. So you can have 10-foot tall leans. You can have that lean go all the way up to there, so that the lean comes directly off of the center section. So it looks like one continuous roof line, or you can step it down. And I chose to step it down, but the roof is galvanized roofing, but we elected not to use straight Galvalume. We went ahead and paid extra for white roofing. It's more reflective, and also it's basically paint on top of Galvalume, so you get a little bit extra corrosion resistance or longevity by having the paint on top of the Galvalume. But we mainly got it because of the Florida sun. We wanted as much reflectivity to reduce the thermal loading, and that's why we went with a white roof. And we did the same exact thing with our pole barn. We have color matched screws, so our screws on our roof are white and our screws on our building side are clay. And the guys who installed it did a real good job. They snapped the chalk line, and every screw was put under a chalk mark rather than just kind of eyeballing it. So our screw lines are pretty straight. Okay folks, we're going to go inside the shed now and talk about the actual concrete pad. And one thing that kind of, I guess, is a little bit frustrating is they tell you that the concrete pad has to be the exact same size as the shed. But if you're online, you're on YouTube, you'll see some people have put steps in their concrete for to prevent water intrusion or to reduce the likelihood that water can come into the shed. So they step their concrete down. And it was just real hard to talk to an engineer at Carolina Carports. You send them emails and talk to them, and they'll send you the specs of the building. And they'll say, you know, it needs to be 44 by 55, the concrete pad. And then when you ask if you can step it down or something of that nature, they basically say, here's the drawing, figure it out yourself. So that's not really a dig on them. I guess they don't want to come to a location to install the building and you've done the concrete wrong. So they tell you the way to do the concrete, and then it's on you if the concrete is wrong. But I'm going to show you that you can do some options here on your own with the concrete that I didn't do. If I'd known how easy they were, then I probably would have done them. But I'm going to explain how this building is put together, and you'll see how you can customize your concrete. We'll go inside and show you the bottom rail, but it's the exact same as here, except this is a very short piece. And that's because this is holding up my header, so it doesn't need a contiguous piece of metal all the way along the bottom. But inside the shed, this is what they do. They take 2 1/4 inch channel. It's galvanized channel. You can see its channel right there. But they take that and then they drill holes into your concrete and they install these lag bolts. So they're special concrete lag bolts, and these foundation 2 1/4 inch metal have vertical studs that come up, and then the vertical studs of the building fit over top of them. And then Bella's gonna say hi. Okay, continuing on, you can see, and this is a good example because I actually sloped my front porch, and you can see the vertical stud here coming off the base plate is a 2-inch gap between the vertical stud that goes up and holds up the header. So inside the building, it's the same exact configuration. It's just good sunlight out here to show you. But the reason there's a gap there is because I have a 2-inch slope on the front 15-foot apron. So this shows how much slope my concrete has. Now, because concrete isn't perfect, Carolina Carports does allow up to, I believe, 2-inch variation in your slab. So they're going to get the top line of your building. They're going to get that level across, right? And if your concrete is wavy going down this line, they'll just lift up these verticals where they slide into the base plate, and then they'll put those 2 screws in. But that's how they'll keep this line here perfectly straight, no matter how crooked your concrete or how wavy your concrete may be. When you ask them, can I slope my porch, or can I slope this or do that, they'll say you're allowed up to a 2-inch variance. They won't really say you can slope. I just took the chance that that I could, and it was no problem at all. So this is the main entry door coming in. And one question that I had was, rather than that entry door being on top of the 2 1/4 inch base metal, can that entry door actually be screwed directly into the concrete? And basically the answer is no. The guys that install are going to install it the way they're taught, and maybe you can convince the installers to put your threshold of your door down low, but that also means they would have to change the way they frame up here, because they come off a vertical right here and they put this horizontal for the top of the door. And this is the way the whole building is made. They use these angle brackets, and they use 2 1/4 inch tubing to frame everything out. So there's no welding involved. It's all galvanized metal. But the door, technically, you could cut out this base plate. You could cut this out right there, and you could push this door threshold down to the bottom, and you could screw it into the concrete directly. But then this won't be contiguous all the way down, and it'll probably mean your building is a little bit less strong. But anyway, if that's a problem for you to have a 2 1/4 inch step, then I think there's a way to get around it, but you would have to convince your installer to do it that way. Now, one thing that I did while I'm over here is I did my own conduit. So I went to Lowe's and I bought the conduit pipe, and I gave it to my contractor that did my concrete, and he put that in. Then we also put in some security hooks in the concrete around the building if I wanted to chain things down. You can see I've got full 200 amp service. That is not included, but you have to think about it. Where do you want your service to come in? So I put that, I actually wasn't sure what side of the building my electrical service would come in. So I put I think it's a 1.5, no, it's a 2-inch electrical conduit there. And I also put one over on that corner because I wasn't sure how the electrical was coming in. And I figured for $5 worth of pipe, that gives me some options. One thing that I don't really like are these 45-degree bracings. And they're just channel, and they're not real thick. But obviously an engineer decided that was needed to hold up that framing that goes up to the header, that was needed to hold up the roof and maybe as part of the whole wind load. But it makes it hard to sheathe the inside of your shed, because that's probably at about the 6.5 foot level. And if you're using, OSB or plywood, you would want that to go up to 8 foot. And then it'll become more apparent later where we've framed the inside of the shed. We've got the doors. You see it's a roll-up door. They're wind load rated doors for hurricanes, but they're really, really thin doors. But we've had some severe storms in the 2 years that we've owned this shed, and we haven't had any issues. The doors don't blow in, but you pay a lot more in Florida for your doors. But again, it is just screwed into, you can see the 2 1/4 framing back there, and then you can see the rail for the door. It's just screwed into that. And then they put a bracket up there to hold the roll up. And then I put electrical up there in case I go to a powered door. But that's the way all the doors are. There's the big roll up, and they're really light. One thing that was very unique, and I actually talked to several people or several companies that built buildings, and I said, look, we want an enclosure within our building. So that's a 12 by 24 enclosure. So I got 40 feet on that side, and of that 40 feet, 24 feet of it is enclosed, and then the whole lean, or the 12-foot lean, is enclosed as well. And I could only find one company that would do that or even consider it, and that was American Steel Buildings and Chad Burke, and he worked with me on that. The thought process of this enclosure was it would be a place that we could get out of the weather. We'll put a mini split in here and get it cooled, and you can see we've framed it out. But the reason for this is to have a place that was climate controlled and maybe use it as a camp until we build our house. That's still the plan. We just haven't gotten as far along with it as we wanted to. But earlier in this video, I talked about these 45 degree or whatever degree angles these are. And the top of this 2x4s, the top of this framing is 8 foot. And you can see that if you put an 8-foot piece of sheathing up here, you're gonna have to cut out around every one of those supports. We only did the framing up 8 feet, and what we're gonna do throughout the whole building is we're gonna go, in this particular section, we're gonna do 3 inches of closed cell spray foam in the top. We're gonna do 2 inches on the exterior wall. That's an exterior wall, and that's an exterior wall. And on this interior wall and this interior wall over here, we're gonna do 1 inch, I think. And then in the main shed area, and again, this main shed area will not get climate controlled. It will be whatever the natural temperature is, minus the solar loading. And I say minus the solar loading because we're gonna put 2 inches of spray foam all up there, all the way on the front and on all the walls. And you can see we've framed that east wall as well. And that's because eventually that'll have workbenches and stuff, and I'll want to hang pegboards and tools and be able to screw different things into the OSB. So we went ahead and framed that wall as well. And that's in a separate video. Now, we talked about headers in the front in the porch area, and these are headers right here. These are headers. Now, if there was no headers here, every 16 or 8, I don't know, every 2 feet or so, there will be a vertical stud like you see here. The headers are extra, and they allow you to have more open bay space. And I elected to pay extra for that. Otherwise, when you came in here, it would still be a building that was sectioned into 3 sections instead of 1 open air building. So again, when you're talking to these installers, and you say you want an open bay, and they say, hey, well, we'll have to put headers there. Okay, that's cool. That's what they're talking about. But you'll see the header still has a vertical here, and that's because I believe a header can only span 20 feet. And my building's 40 foot long, so we had to put a vertical support in between there. And I'll spin around where the enclosure is, and the enclosure is 24 foot. But to span this 12 foot behind me, we had to put a header there as well. So those are headers, and they're good. They're a good option if you want to open bay. But if you don't go with headers, where I'm standing right here, there's going to be vertical studs to hold up your rafters and your ceiling or your roof. And the same thing behind me. If that header wasn't there, you would see vertical studs all the way down. Okay, so the way they build this building, take that 2 1/4 framing and they go all the way around the edge of your building in a square fashion, right? This 2 1/4 sits right on top of the concrete, and it's held in with those bolts that are screwed into the concrete. They come in with drills and drill into your concrete, and they put those bolts in. So we talked about plumbing and how you'd have to set that up initially, but what I elected to do in this back corner is have a stand-up shower that's open to the shed. There'll be a curtain there, and we'll have some non-slip on the floor there, but a shower where you can, you're out here working, you can rinse off real quick, and of course a potty over there. So with a door, that'll be enclosed. So that's all framed out, and that'll be foamed in, and we put an exhaust fan. We've plumbed it so it can have a hot water heater on the top, and we've got 220 electrical for a hot water heater on the top, and then the water will come in from the well right there where you see the blue and red PEX. And then we're also going to have an outside cold and hot water, probably a stainless steel sink out on the porch. So we've already ran the PEX for that down the wall. Okay, I'm going to attempt to explain what I meant by having your concrete stepped down. So you can see the 2 1/4 is right on top of the concrete, and this is my door opening. And with most house garages, your concrete's going to be stepped down at this point. So your garage door comes down right here. And most houses from here on, this concrete is lower. And maybe I'll do a drawing and put it up here now. But you can put that whole 2 1/4 framing down into the concrete, or at least make a pocket for them to put it down into the concrete. And that would make my apron would be 2 1/4 lower as well going out. So my whole point on the concrete is no one will tell you that you can make these modifications. But if you think about it, it's not rocket science, right? We got a 2 1/4 frame that's going to get bolted to the top of the concrete, or it can get bolted in a little recess 2 1/4 lower. And the installers don't care. Now that we've talked about the concrete, you can see that my concrete is above grade. And obviously this slopes down, so water is not going to come up. Okay, so on this side of my shed, you can see I have about a 4 inches of concrete above grade. And I have a 16-inch footer all the way around the edge of my concrete. And my concrete is 4 inches thick with fiber reinforcement. So it's, I think, 33 or 3,500 PSI concrete. One thing I wish I had done in this center bay, you know, I have a L-Series tractor, Kubota L-Series tractor. It's not that heavy, so 4 inches of concrete is plenty for it. But now I also have an excavator, and although it's only a 6,300 pound excavator, I wouldn't, to go back in time, I would have done 6 inches of concrete down this 20-inch bay rather than 4 inch, just to make it stronger. But getting back to the slope, my property slopes from where the camera is pointed now down to the shed. So water comes from right to left and hits the side of my shed, and then it has to go left or right. And when I was talking about water issues and having your concrete stepped, is here's my concrete right here. What have I got? Maybe an inch or two of concrete. And then this screw goes into that 2 1/4 inch framing. So I don't have a lot of leeway here for water. So if there was a heavy rain, water could potentially go up under that middle right there, and then go up under the 2 1/4 framing around the base of my shed, and then get a little bit of water inside my shed. Now, I am addressing this. Number one, I put gutters on my shed, and that is not an option that Carolina Carports offers, and I wasn't even sure that you could put them on there because of the metal framing, but you can. So I've guttered this side of my shed to reduce the amount of water that would lay here. And then I've also done a lot of sloping. It doesn't look like it, but there's a swale here, and water will either go towards my truck and the hay bales where I have a drain, or it'll come towards me and go around the shed. But if I had a step in my concrete, then that would be further insurance of water intrusion getting up under this side. Okay, folks, I went as detailed as I could on this shed because I know that I couldn't find that level of detail with these metal buildings. It was not a tedious process. It was not a complex process. I don't know what the current weight is, but I had to wait 4 to 5 months for concrete, and then they won't allow you to actually schedule the install of the building until the concrete is finished, and you send them a picture of the concrete that's finished, because they don't want to show up on site and the concrete isn't done. So, and then you get in line to get your building built. So after my concrete, I probably waited, I think April till June. I probably waited 3 or 4 months for my building to get built. But like I said, once it started going up, it went up quick. The guys worked 12 hours a day in the rain and got it up. So anyway, overall positive experience. I highly recommend a metal building. I highly recommend a porch, highly recommend headers, and step your concrete. I know I beat that horse to death, but step your concrete. And that pretty much covers it. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you enjoyed the detail I went into. If you did, please click like, please click subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care.